Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Servants. Today we will start the beginning of a series in the Behind the Servants catalog that I have been asked to do for a long time now. I have mulled over how best to deal with the Arthurian legend, given that it is so massive in scope and influence, and realistically, a 20-hour-long video would be less interesting than bite-sized pieces that you can all pick and choose from. Perhaps once I've covered the majority of the knights and legends, I'll compile all of these together to see what the actual length is, but for now, let's hold off on talking about the future and focus on discussing the present. From her inception, she was immediately one of the most popular characters announced in JP in 2021, and her kit lives up to the hype, being an absolute monster of a unit and monster in myth, as well as an EX tier waifu. We have Morgan Le Fay, or as I will be calling her throughout this video, simply Morgan. As of the making of this video, I have still yet to play through Lost Belt 6, so if you're concerned about spoilers in that regard, don't be. We will be looking exclusively at the historical and mythological Morgan. This one's going to be a long one, so without further ado, let us begin. Allow me to explain something that I touched on very briefly in the Matter of France video, as it suffers from the same issue that the Arthurian legend does. The Arthurian canon has been added to by various authors, and there was a time when it was considered a rite of passage to contribute to these romantic legends, thus expanding the tales of Lancelot and Guinevere amongst all of the other Arthurian myths. What this means is that while each character has a shell with a general concept that is accepted by all, they can push the boundaries to whatever they desire and make alterations to the characters. Morgan is generally accepted as being a powerful sorceress across every source. However, her goal and overall demeanor shifted as time went on. For example, as far as we know, she is originally a Welsh mythological figure, first appearing in a text by Geoffrey of Monmouth as a healer from the island of Avalon. Then, in the 13th century, she gets her proper backstory, where she is the youngest daughter of Igraine, Arthur's mother, and her first husband, Gorloy. Arthur's father was Uther, making Morgan and Arthur half-siblings. However, let us take a look into her first appearance. She lives on the island of Avalon with her sisters as the leader. She accepts the corpse of King Arthur and agrees to attempt to revive him from the dead. She and her sisters are able to shapeshift and fly, and Morgan in particular is a master of one of the most complex magics known to the ancient mythos, math. She teaches this as well as astronomy to her sisters, Monroe, Mozo or Mozoe, Glyton or Glitton, Glatonia, Glaton, Tyrone, Tyrone, Thyton, and Thyton. Another postulated account is that she actually appears during the Trojan War as a potential love interest to Hector, but after he denies her, she attempts to pursue him in revenge. This, however, may be referencing a similar figure, but not our Morgan, just a similarly named character. Another author that seems to have been a large contributing factor for her being added to the mythos is a Frenchman named Chrétien de Troyes. Through this, we learn of Morgan's husband, Guigemar. This is actually derivative from a piece by famed 12th century female author Marie de France, who places him as a husband to a fairy queen. From de Troyes' texts, we learn that there is tension between Morgan and Guinevere, and that she resides in a mystical wood known as the Vale Perilous. This is a real place in Pinepont Forest in England, and was a place she would send unfaithful knights to be punished. However, de Troyes does still place her in the role as a healer, despite also painting her in a villain's role. Morgan is said to have a son named Alwain, spelled with a Y. This is first added to the mythos in the 13th century by Thiollet, which was written by an anonymous author. From Morgan, in the 13th century as well, a new character would emerge. It would be Arthur's physician named Morgan Tud, but let's focus more on the prose in which she appears. Let's start with what we know her best from, the Arthurian legend. Morgan was offered in a political marriage by Uther to King Urien of Gore. The land he ruled over was a semi-supernatural place where mystical beings reigned supreme, supposedly even to this day. North England. Though now a queen, she did not get on well with her husband and instead served as a lady-in-waiting for Guinevere, and the two would become fast friends. However, Guinevere caught Morgan in an affair with her more famed consort, Guigemar, and tried to prevent the relationship, likely as a way to prevent a loss of honor for Morgan. It is said from this that the grudge held by Morgan towards Guinevere would be created. Morgan would leave the courts and give birth to her son, though at this point the name was not given, but we can assume it is Alwain. She studies the dark arts under Merlin, who was enamored by her beauty, or in some tellings, it is she who is enamored by him. There is also a telling of the story that Merlin came to Morgan after he and the Lady in the Lake had a falling out, which Morgan was the perpetrator of. Regardless, they meet up at some point and Merlin became the tutor to her, and as a result she becomes an unparalleled woman of intelligence and magic. However, the cock wizard gets a little randy and Morgan threatens to torture him for a long time before she kills him, and so he leaves. She then takes a knight with no name as her lover, and upon discovering that he too is unfaithful, creates a mystical veil for the unfaithful to become lost in. As mentioned prior, it was called Veil Perilous, but in this telling it is known as Val Sans Retour, or the Veil of No Return. This creates the theme for Morgan seeking a vengeance against the unfaithful, including the unfaithfulness of friends, thus she began her plot against Guinevere. It is mentioned in some versions of the myth that she resents her half-brother Arthur as well, though it is never really explained why outside of him being the antithesis of good. From my judgment, for the most part, her disdain for Arthur comes more so from her hatred for Guinevere, and their connection together. And the easiest way to hurt Guinevere would be to hurt her king, so Morgan hatches a plan to steal the legendary sword Excalibur, as well as its scabbard. Arthur had initially entrusted the scabbard to Morgan, trusting his own sister over any other, including his wife, but after her leaving the court, it was taken back by Arthur. At this point, Morgan had returned to Urien, and her son Alwyn was now a successful knight. However, she had taken another lover on the side named Accolon, making me begin to question why she has such an issue with unfaithfulness. Her plan was to have Accolon steal the sword and the scabbard and then challenge the king to a duel. The scabbard of Excalibur granted whoever possessed it protection, and without it, Morgan was certain that Accolon would prevail over the half-sibling, and then the pair would become the rulers of Camelot together. To further complicate things, a mystical boat with 12 beautiful women appears and takes Accolon and Arthur away while they are out hunting before the initial theft. Morgan then attempts to kill her current husband, but is stopped by Alwyn. He lets her go after she claims that the devil was inside of her and was forcing her hand, and renounces her wicked ways. Arthur is able to kill Accolon after Morgan sets for them to duel, and Arthur, discovering that she is the one who is behind all of this, attempts to capture her. However, Merlin, still horny for Morgan, assists in her escape. Despite the initial loss, Morgan did not give up and managed to steal the scabbard of Excalibur again. Once again, she was pursued by Arthur and his knights, but before he could catch her, she threw the scabbard into the lake and turned herself into stone. Arthur saw this as an act of divine punishment and left the statued Morgan alone. This loss of the scabbard is what would eventually lead to Arthur's death at the hands of Mordred. On her way home from this ordeal, she would save one of Arthur's knights, Manison, after learning that he was related to Accolon. Morgan would move on to her own land in Gore, where she would use various methods of destroying Arthur from a distance. One of these was a clone that incinerated anybody who wore it, but most famously is how she personally handled Lancelot. If you had been exposed to Fate at any point before Fate Grand Order, it is likely through either Fate Zero or Fate Stay Night. Fate Zero has a rather intense relationship between Arthur and Lancelot, as it is revealed that the absolutely insane screaming shadow that can turn anything into a weapon is Arthur's very own most loyal knight, Lancelot, wrecked with guilt. Morgan would be a contributing factor in the revelation of Lancelot's infidelity. Morgan knew Lancelot's weaknesses. He was unable to raise his hand against women and would never attack the kin of his king. This made Morgan the woman that he feared the most in the entire world. It didn't help that Morgan was absolutely infatuated with the handsome Lancelot, often using all kinds of trickery, seduction, abduction, drugs, and coercion to try and make him her own. However, he remained faithful to his lover, Guinevere. This one-sided love is reminiscent of a similarly named goddess, Morrigan, with 2 R's, and our very own Lancer, Ku, whose name pronunciation I am corrected on regardless of how I pronounce it, is so Ku is just going to be called Ku. Note, Morrigan and Morgan Le Fay are not the same. The ancient Irish had the character of Morrigan for a long time before Morgan Le Fay came about, though I will concede that they are similar, and that it is possible that one inspired the other, though the jury is still out on that one and it's just speculation on my part. In one attempt to seduce Lancelot, she and 2 other sorceresses, one unnamed and the other one who is described as a close friend of hers named Sybil, capture him and attempt to force themselves on him. However, they cannot decide who will go first, and during their quarreling, a maidservant helps Lancelot escape. At another time, Lancelot frees 250 knights from Val Sans Retour. This included Morgan's husband and son, both turned to stone for their own infidelities. Morgan then traps Lancelot in the Vale, and with the use of a magic ring, detains him. Her hope is that in his absence, Guinevere would die of grief. To further this, Morgan herself would appear and torment Guinevere, that is, until a new court sorceress of King Arthur's, Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, gave Guinevere a magic ring to neutralize Morgan's powers. Morgan holds Lancelot hostage for a year, only once letting him leave to save Gawain. However, after a year, the cursed magic that surrounded Morgan appeared to be taking a toll on Lancelot's health, and she released him so that he did not die. Later on, she hosted her nephews Mordred, Gawain, and Gareth to heal them after a battle, showing that family will be there even after they literally try and murder each other. Mordred spots a painting on one of the walls drawn by Lancelot of him and Guinevere together, essentially exposing the affair to 3 of the knights. Morgan shows the painting to Gawain and Gareth and encourages her nephews to expose it to the world. They refuse, however, and go on their way. Regardless, Morgan would then begin whispering the truth of the affair into the ears of the other knights and to the king himself, sowing the seeds of doubt of what would ultimately reveal the truth of Lancelot's betrayal to his king. Another knight that Morgan was fairly familiar with is our very own sad lad Tristan. Morgan was insatiable and loved handsome men, and Tristan was a handsome knight amongst handsome knights. While she fancied Tristan for some time, this would turn into outright hatred after he killed her unnamed lover in The Prose of Tristan. This lover may have been a knight named Hunison the Bald, known for his wondrous hair, or lack thereof. He is killed by Tristan after he attacks him for essentially being so attractive that Morgan was looking at him. Tristan slays him with a lance, which Morgan comes into possession of after Hunison, mortally wounded, takes it back to his lover. He dies soon after, and in grief, Morgan entombs him. It is said that Morgan enchanted the lance and gave it to Mark of Cornwall, who would use it to eventually kill Sir Tristan. Before this happens, though, Morgan sends a gift to the court of Camelot, a magical drinking horn from which any unfaithful women cannot drink without spilling the contents. This was sent in hopes of exposing Guinevere's infidelity, but instead revealed the lover of Tristan, Isolede's adulterous ways. This was another key factor that led to Tristan's death, and the reason why his Bon CE is called by me, and now by you, the Cuckboat. In the end of this rendition of the Arthurian legend, Morgan vanishes for a long time from the record. Arthur presumes that she has died and breathes a sigh of relief. Years later, they meet up again in one of her castles that Arthur stumbles upon on a hunting trip. They reconcile with each other, and Morgan warmly welcomes back her half-brother to her home. Arthur invites her to return to Camelot, but she declines, saying that she will be moving to Avalon to study amongst the women who knew all the world's magic. Morgan then tells Arthur to his face that Lancelot and Guinevere have been having an affair behind his back, confirming what he had been told by his nephew Agravain. Morgan then tells Arthur that he will die in the coming conflict, but despite this, he presses on. The Round Table breaks and war ensues. Guinevere is set to be burned at the stake for her infidelity, and this is what causes Lancelot's rebellion. He kills many of the knights of the Round Table and takes Guinevere away, and in the madness of this, Mordred launches his assault on King Arthur, leading to the death of them both on the hill of Camelin. It is said that Morgan was among the black-cloaked women that appeared on the boat that carried Arthur to Avalon after Bedivere returned the sword to the Lady of the Lake. The grave of King Arthur was found empty, save for his helmet. That is the most common version of her mythos, but there is much more to her. As I stated at the top, authors have been adding their own spin to the Arthurian legend since forever, and Morgan is no exception. Let's start with the 15th century author Thomas Mallory, the author of the book known as The Death of King Arthur. He renovates much of Morgan's character, reducing her conflict with Guinevere and her ability as a healer. Remember this and never forget it. Morgan, at the heart of the majority of her myths and from her origins, is a healer. So it is a little bit confusing why they did not play around with this at all in Fate, though she does have some support capabilities. Mallory does Morgan fairly dirty, reducing her role to a standard villainess who just wants to rule. She is described by scholars in this depiction as sociopathic, which is a huge divergence from her initial portrayal, but this may in part be why she appears as a berserker in-game. Rather than studying under Merlin, she instead studied astrology and black magic, becoming a necromancer under the tutelage of nuns, and much of her magic appears to be directly taken from the powers of the Celtic fairies. She takes a much more direct approach to solving aforementioned problems, such as when Tristan kills her lover, she sends 30 knights to immediately deal with him, but they are all killed by Tristan instead. As for how he explains why she forgives Arthur in the end and reconciles, Mallory gives no explanation. Morgan simply accepts him for who he is, and then he dies on her lap after Camelin. It is a complete butchery of a well-written character set to fit the mind of a man who clearly dislikes the fact that a woman was written as powerful. That is not just my assessment either. It is mentioned by scholars that Mallory's opinions toward the opposite sex were well documented and not favorable, even for the time period. However, as it is a part of the canon, it is worth bringing up. Morgan appears in a later addition to the canon and one of the best known Arthurian legends, that of the Green Knight. In this, Morgan is described as a goddess, having sent the knight to frighten Guinevere to death. I'm going to super summarize this because this will be a large part of the Gawain video in the future. The Green Knight challenges anyone to strike him, but only if they would receive a strike from him in 1 year and a day. Sir Gawain accepts this and beheads the massive knight. The knight picks up his head and rides off, having thoroughly frightened everyone present. In 1 year and a day, the knight returns and takes a swing at Gawain, only clipping his neck, and reveals that this was all a test of loyalty set up by Morgan. The remainder of her stories tied to the Arthurian legend are much in the same, but with some factors switched around, such as her studying under Vivian rather than under Merlin, or that she is actually a fairy rather than incredibly smart, and that is the source of her magic, but she appears outside of the legends of King Arthur and Camelot as well. She also appears in the legends of Charlemagne. She takes the hero Ogier the Dane as her lover after he had done all of his legendary deeds, at the age of 100. She turns him young once again and takes him to the Isle of Avalon, where she lives with Arthur and Sir Gawain. They live there for 200 years, but she allows him to return to the mainland to protect France from a Muslim invasion. She protects him in the battles, but does make him return to Avalon once they are concluded. Together, the pair have 2 sons, one of whom is a giant, and they all lived in a palace of jewels. She is also noted as being the protector of the child of the Fairy Queen and Julius Caesar, Juan Bordeaux, as well as that of the Fairy King, Oberon. They reside in a land of magic where time runs slower in one telling of her story. In a later recounting, she takes the Saracen hero Renart to Avalon, where he falls in love with the sorceress. They have a son together who turns out to be nothing but an evil little thing named Corbin. Renart attempts to escape Avalon so that he may assist his other child in a fight, but Morgan sends the Cath Palug after him, and it destroys his ship. He survives, however, with the assistance of a mermaid. She also appears in the legends of Bradamante as one of the sorceresses on the island where Ruggiero is being held. Morgan falls in love with Arante, a good sorceress disguised as a man named Ricciardo. She becomes increasingly more desperate to seduce Ricciardo, throwing away her own lover in favor of the new one, though it is exclusively a one-sided attraction. She even continues to pursue this after discovering that Ricciardo is a female. Morgan also appears in the Italian legends as well as a prophetic figure, particularly linked to Sicily. There is an entire legend of a daughter of hers who manages to defeat Sir Gawain by turning into a serpent. They would then become lovers afterward. However, she is kidnapped by Guinevere, who wanted Gawain killed because he had rejected her advances. After 3 years, Gawain slays a dragon protecting her and rescues her. For Italian myths focused exclusively on Morgan, she is said to reside on Mount Etna in a mystical castle. In fact, Fata Morgana is the name of a mirage-like natural occurrence that happens off the shores of Sicily that makes what appears to be a castle appear in the distance. During the Italian Renaissance, she was often paired with legendary figure Orlando from The Matter of France. She appears here as she does above, a powerful but wicked sorceress, sister to Arthur and pupil of Merlin. In the legend, she plans on destroying the planet itself, existing in a magical garden beneath a lake. She kidnaps lovers for herself from the surface until Orlando destroys the garden and captures Morgan. Here, he frees all but one of her captured lovers. She will later turn that lover into a dragon who is eventually freed by Orlando again, and then Morgana is sworn to abandon her plans. In this rendition, she has 3 daughters, Carvilia, Morganetta, and Nivetta. To close this out, I want to look at what the Fate rendition of Morgan is capable of and see how this stacks up to her historical counterpart. Her first skill is Charisma of Desire, which is fitting given how she is in a constant pursuit of something, be it lovers or the crown. Her second skill is called Protection of the Lake. I know that it evolves, but I'm not going to spoil what it evolves into. This is likely derivative from her relation to the garden under the lake, as well as her relationship towards the Lady of the Lake, Vivian. Her third skill is Beyond the Furthest End, which is described as being given to her as a result of her crossing over to the island of Avalon and then returning. Her Noble Phantasm is a representation of her desire to rule over Camelot and her ideal version of that world. That was unreachable while she was a mortal. I'm sure that this is explored more in Avalon Le Fay, but everyone is hyping it up for me, so I'm excited to play through it and see it all for myself. But that is it! Thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. If you would like to request a servant, please let me know down in the comments. Leave a like as it really does help out the channel, subscribe to catch these as they go up, follow my Twitch for significantly less structured content. I also have a Twitter, but for now, keep your chin up. Peace.